Good evening, my friends. Indiana Holmes here for Story Time. We continue tonight with The Phantom of the Opera, Chapter 21, Interesting and Instructive Vicissitudes of a Persian in the Cellar of the Opera. The Persian's narrative. It was the first time that I entered the house on the lake. I had often begged the trapdoor lover, as we used to call Eric in my country, to open its mysterious doors to me. He always refused. I made very many attempts, but in vain, to obtain admittance. Watch him as I might, after I first learned that he had taken up his permanent abode in the opera, the darkness was too thick to enable me to see how he worked the door in the wall on the lake. One day, when I thought myself alone, I stepped into the boat and rowed towards that part of the wall through which I had seen Eric disappear. It was then that I came into contact with the siren who guarded the approach and whose charm was very nearly fatal to me. I had no sooner put off from the bank than the silence amid which I floated on the water was disturbed by a sort of whispered singing that hovered all around me. It was half breath, half music. It rose softly from the waters of the lake, and I was surrounded by it, through I knew not what artifice. It followed me, moved me, with as much so soft that it did not alarm me. On the contrary, in my longing to approach the source of that sweet and enticing harmony, I leaned out of my little boat over the water, for there was no doubt in my mind that the singing came from the water itself. By this time, I was alone in the boat in the middle of the lake. The voice, for it was now distinctly a voice, was beside me on the water. I leaned over, leaned still farther. The lake was perfectly calm. The moonbeam that passed through the air hole in the Rue Scribe showed me absolutely nothing on its surface, which was smooth and black as ink. I shook my ears to get rid of a possible humming, but I soon had to accept the fact that there was no humming in the ears so harmonious as the singing whisper that followed and now attracted me. Had I been inclined to superstition, I should have certainly thought that it had to do with some siren whose business it was to confound the traveler who should venture on the waters of the house on the lake. Fortunately, I come from a country where we are too fond of fantastic things not to know them through and through, and I had no doubt but that I was face to face with some new invention of Eric's. But this invention was so perfect that I leaned out of the boat. I was impelled less by a desire to discover its trick than to enjoy its charm, and I leaned out, until I almost overturned the boat. Suddenly, two monstrous arms issued from the bosom of the waters and seized me by the neck, dragging me down to its depths with irresistible force. I should certainly have been lost if I had not had the time to give a cry by which Eric knew me, for it was he, and instead of drowning me, as was certainly his first intention, he swam with me and laid me gently on the bank. "How imprudent you are!" he said, as he stood before me, dripping with water. "Why to try to enter my house? I never invited you. I don't want you there, nor anybody. Did you save my life only to make it unbearable to me? However great the service you rendered him, Eric may end by forgetting it, and you know that nothing can restrain Eric, not even Eric himself." He spoke, but I had now no other wish than to know what I already called the trick of the siren. He satisfied my curiosity, for Eric, who is a real monster, I have seen him at work in Persia, alas, is also, in certain respects, a regular child, vain and self-conceited, and there is nothing he loves so much, after astonishing people, as to prove all the really miraculous ingenuity of his mind. He laughed and showed me a long reed. "It's the silliest trick you ever saw," he said, "but it's very useful for breathing and singing in the water. I learned it from the Tonkin pirates, who are able to remain hidden for hours in the beds of the rivers. I spoke to him severely. It's a trick that nearly killed me, I said, and it may have been fatal to others. You know what you promised me, Eric. No more murders. Have I really committed murders? He asked, putting on his most amiable air. Wretched man, I cried. Have you forgotten the rosy hours of Mazandarian? Yes, he replied in a sadder tone. I prefer to forget them. I used to make the little Sultana laugh, though. All that belongs to the past, I declared, but there is the present, and you are responsible to me for the present, because if I had wished, there would have been none of you at all. Remember that, Eric. I saved your life. And I took advantage of the turn of conversation to speak to him of something that had long been on my mind. Eric, I asked. Eric, swear that... What? He retorted. You know I never keep my oaths. Oaths are made to catch gulls with. Tell me. You can tell me, at any rate. Well, the chandelier, Eric. What about the chandelier? You know what I mean. Oh, he sniggered. I don't mind telling you about the chandelier. It wasn't I. The chandelier was a very old and worn thing. When Eric laughed, he was more terrible than ever. He jumped into the boat, chuckling so horribly that I could not help trembling. Very old and worn, my dear Daraga. Very old and worn, the chandelier. It fell of itself. It came down with a smash. And now, Daraga, take my advice and go dry yourself, or you'll catch a cold in the head, and never get into my boat again. And whatever you do, don't try to enter my house. I am not always there, Daraga, and I should be sorry to have to dictate my requiem mass to you. So saying, swinging to and fro like a monkey, and still chuckling, he pushed off and soon disappeared in the darkness of the lake. From that day I gave up all thought of penetrating into his house by that lake. The entrance was obviously too well guarded, especially since he had learned that I knew about it. But I felt that there must be another entrance, for I had often seen Eric disappear in the third cellar when I was watching him, though I could never imagine how. Ever since I had discovered Eric installed in the opera, I lived in a perpetual terror of his horrible fancies, not insofar as I was concerned, but I dreaded everything for others. And whenever some incident, some fatal event happened, I always thought to myself, I should not be surprised if that were Eric, even as others used to say, it's the ghost. How often I have not heard people utter that phrase with a smile. Poor devils, if they had known that the ghost existed in the flesh, I swear that they would not have laughed. Although Eric announced to me very solemnly that he had changed and that he had become the most virtuous of men since he was loved for himself, a sentence that at first perplexed me most terribly, I could not help shuddering when I thought of the monster. His horrible, unparalleled, and repulsive ugliness put him without the pale of humanity. And it often seemed to me that for this reason he no longer believed that he had any duty toward the human race. The way in which he spoke of his love affairs only increased my alarm, for I foresaw the cause of fresh and more hideous tragedies in this event to which he alluded so boastfully. On the other hand, I soon discovered the curious moral traffic established between the monster and Christine Daae. Hiding in the lumber room next to the young prima donna's dressing room, I listened to wonderful musical displays that evidently flung Christine into marvelous ecstasy. But all the same, I would never have thought that Eric's voice, which was loud as thunder or soft as an angel's voice, at will, could have made her forget his ugliness. I understood all when I learned that Christine had not yet seen him. I had the occasion to go to the dressing room, and, remembering the lessons he had once given me, I had no difficulty in discovering the trick that made the wall with the mirror swing round, and I ascertained the means of the hollow bricks, and so on. by which he made his voice carry to Christine as though she heard it close beside her. In this way, I also discovered the road that led to the well and the dungeon, the communists' dungeon, and also the trapdoor that enabled Eric to go straight to the cellars below the stage. A few days later, what was not my amazement to learn by my own eyes and ears that Eric and Christine Day saw each other, and to catch the monster stooping over the little well in the communists' road and sprinkling the forehead of Christine Day, who had fainted. A white horse, the horse out of the Profeta, which had disappeared from the stables under the opera, was standing quietly beside them. I showed myself. It was terrible. I saw sparks fly from those eyes, and before I had time to say a word, I received a blow on the head that stunned me. When I came to myself, Eric, Christine, and the white horse had disappeared. I felt sure that the poor girl was a prisoner in the house on the lake. Without hesitation, I resolved to return to the bank, notwithstanding the attendant danger. For 24 hours I lay in wait for the monster to appear, for I felt that he must go out, driven by the need of obtaining provisions. And in this connection, I may say that when he went out into the streets or ventured to show himself in public, he wore a pasteboard nose with a mustache attached to it, instead of his own horrible hole of a nose. This did not quite take away his corpse-like air, but it made him almost, I say almost, endurable to look at. I therefore watched on the bank of the lake, and weary of long waiting, was beginning to think that he had gone through the door, that other door, the door in the third cellar, when I heard a slight splashing in the dark. I saw the two yellow eyes shining like candles, and soon the boat touched shore. Eric jumped out and walked up to me. "You've been here for 24 hours, he said, "and you're annoying me. I tell you, all this will end very badly, and you will have brought it upon yourself, for I have been extraordinarily patient with you. You think you are following me, you great booby, whereas it's I who am following you, and I know all that you know about me here. I spared you yesterday in my communists' road, but I warn you, seriously, don't let me catch you here again. Upon my word, you don't seem able to take a hint." He was so furious that I did not think for a moment of interrupting him. After puffing and blowing like a walrus, he put his horrible thoughts into words. "Yes, you must learn, once and for all, I say, to take a hint. I tell you that, with your recklessness, for you have already been twice arrested by the shade in the felt hat, who did not know what you were doing in the cellars, and took you to the managers. Who looked upon you as an eccentric Persian interested in stage mechanism and life behind scenes. I know all about it. I was there, in the office. You know I am everywhere. Well, I tell you, and I tell you that without recklessness, they will end by wondering what you are after here, and they will end by knowing that you are after Eric, and then they will be after Eric themselves, and they will discover the house on the lake. If they do, it will be a bad lookout for you, old chap, a bad lookout. I won't answer for anything." Again, he puffed and blew like a walrus. "I won't answer for anything. If Eric's secrets cease to be Eric's secrets, it will be a bad lookout for a goodly number of the human race. That's all I have to tell you. And unless you are a great booby, it ought to be enough for you, except that you don't know how to take a hint." He had sat down on the stern of his boat and was kicking up his heels against the planks, waiting to hear what I had to answer. I simply said, "It's not Eric that I'm after here." "Who then?" "You know as well as I do. It's Christine Day," I answered. He retorted, "I have every right to see her in my own house. I am loved for my own sake." "That's not true," I said. "You have carried her off and are keeping her locked up." "Listen," he said. will you promise never to meddle in my affairs again if I prove to you that I am loved for my own sake?" "Yes, I promise you," I replied without hesitation, for I felt convinced for such a monster the proof was impossible. "Well, then, it's quite simple. Christine Daae shall leave this as she pleases and come back again. Yes, come back again, because she wishes. Come back of herself, because she loves me for myself." "Oh, I doubt if she will come back. But it is your duty to let her go. My duty to you, great booby. It is my wish to let her go, and she will come back again, for she loves me. All this will end in marriage. A marriage at Madeleine, you great booby. Do you believe me now when I tell you that my nuptial mass is written? Wait till you hear the Kyrie." He beat time with his heels on the planks of the boat and sang, "Kyrie, Kyrie, Kyrie eleison." Wait till you hear that mass. "Look here," I said, "I shall believe you if I see Christine Daae come out of the house on the lake and go back to it of her own accord. And you won't meddle any more in my affairs?" "No." "Very well, you shall see that tonight. Come to the masked ball. Christine and I will go and have a look around. Then you can hide in the lumber room, and you shall see Christine, who will have gone to her dressing room, delighted to come back to the Communists' Road. And now be off, for I must go and do some shopping." To my intense astonishment, things happened as he had announced. Christine Daae left the house on the lake and returned to it several times without apparently being forced to do so. It was very difficult for me to clear my mind of Eric. However, I resolved to be extremely prudent, and I did not make the mistake of returning to the shore of the lake or of going to the Communist Road, but the idea of the secret entrance in the third cellar haunted me, and I repeatedly went and waited for hours behind the scene of the Rue de Lahore, which had been left for some reason or another. At last my patience was rewarded. One day I saw the monster come toward me, on his knees. I was certain that he could not see me. He passed between the scene behind which I stood and a set piece, went to the wall and pressed on a spring that moved the stone and afforded him ingress. He passed through this, and the stone closed behind him. I waited for at least 30 minutes, and then I pressed the spring in my turn. Everything happened as with Eric, but I was careful not to go through the hole myself, for I knew that Eric was inside. On the other hand, the idea that I might be caught by Eric suddenly made me think of the death of Joseph Buquet. I did not wish to jeopardize the advantages of so great a discovery, which might be useful to many people, to a goodly number of the human race. In Eric's words, and I left the cellars of the opera after carefully replacing the stone. I continued to be greatly interested in the relations between Eric and Christine Daae, not from any morbid curiosity, but because of the terrible thought which obsessed my mind that Eric was capable of anything. If he once discovered that he was not loved for his own sake, as he imagined, I continued to wonder very cautiously about the opera, and soon learned the truth about the monster's dreary love affair. He filled Christine's mind through the terror with which he inspired her, but the dear child's heart belonged wholly to the Vicomte Raoul de Chagny. While they played about like an innocent engaged couple on the upper floors of the opera to avoid the monster, they little suspected that someone was watching over them. I was prepared to do anything, to kill the monster if necessary, and explain to the police afterward. But Eric did not show himself, and I felt none the more comfortable for that. I must explain my whole plan. I thought that the monster, being driven from the house by jealousy, would thus enable me to enter it without danger through the passage in the third cellar. It was important for everybody's sake that I should know exactly what was inside. One day, tired of waiting for an opportunity, I moved the stone and at once heard an astounding music. The monster was working at his Don Juan triumphant with every door in the house wide open. I knew that this was the work of his life. I was careful not to stir and remained prudently in my dark hole. He stopped playing for a moment and began walking about his place like a madman, and he said aloud at the top of his voice, "It must be finished first, quite finished." This speech was not calculated to reassure me, and when the music recommenced, I closed the stone very softly. On the day of the abduction of Christine Daae, I did not come to the theater until rather late in the evening, trembling lest I should hear bad news. I had spent a horrible day, for after reading in the morning paper the announcement of the forthcoming marriage between Christine Daae and Vicomte de Chagny, I wondered whether, after all, I should not do better to denounce the monster. But the reason returned to me, and I was persuaded that this action could only precipitate a possible catastrophe. When my cab set me down before the opera, I was really almost astonished to see it still standing, but I am something of a fatalist, like all good Orientals, and I entered readily for anything. Christine Daae's abduction in the prison act, which naturally surprised everybody, found me prepared. I was quite certain that she had been juggled away by Eric, that prince of conjurers, and I thought positively that this was the end of Christine, and perhaps of everybody, so much that I thought of advising all these people who they were staying on at the theater to make good their escape. I felt, however, that they would be sure to look upon me as a madman, as I then decided to refrain. On the other hand, I resolved to act without further delay, as I was concerned. The chances in my favor that Eric at that moment was thinking only of his captive. This was the moment to enter his house through the third cellar, and I resolved to take with me that poor little desperate Viscount, who, at the first suggestion, accepted with an amount of confidence in myself that touched me profoundly. I had sent my servant for my pistols. I gave one to the Viscount, and I advised him to hold himself ready to fire, for after all, Eric might be waiting for us behind the wall. We were to go by the Communist road and through the trap door. Seeing my pistols, the little Viscount asked me if I were going to fight a duel. I said, yes, and what a duel. But of course, I had no time to explain anything to him. The little Viscount is a brave fellow, but he knew hardly anything about his adversary, and it was so much the better. My great fear was that he was already somewhere near us, preparing the Punjab lasso. No one knows better than he how to throw the Punjab lasso, for he is the king of stranglers, even as he is the prince of conjurers. When he had finished making the little Sultana laugh at the time of the rosy hours of Manzadarian, she herself used to ask him to amuse her by giving her a thrill. It was then that he introduced the sport of the Punjab lasso. He had lived in India and acquired an incredible skill in the art of strangulation. He would make them lock him into the courtyard, into which they brought a warrior, usually a man condemned to death, armed with a long spike and a broadsword. Eric had only his lasso, and it was always just when the warrior thought he was going to kill Eric with a tremendous force, Eric instead averted the blow, and then we heard the lasso whistle through the air. With a turn of the wrist, Eric tightened the noose round his adversary's neck, and in this fashion dragged him before the little Sultana and her women, and sat looking from a window and applauding. The little Sultana herself learned to wield the Punjab lasso and killed several of her women and even of her friends who visited her. But I prefer to drop this terrible subject of the rosy hours of Manzadarian. I have mentioned it only to explain why, on arriving with the Vicomte de Chagny in the cellars of the opera, I was bound to protect my companion against the ever-threatening danger of the death by strangulation. My pistols could serve no purpose, for Eric was not likely to show himself, but Eric could always strangle us. I had no time to explain all this to the Viscount. Besides, there is nothing to be gained by complicating the position. I simply told Monsieur de Chagny to keep his hand at level of his eye, with the arm bent as though waiting for the command to fire. With this victim in this attitude, it is impossible even for the most expert strangler to throw the lasso with advantage. It catches you not only around the neck, but also around the arm and the hand. This enables you to unloose the lasso, which then becomes a harness. After avoiding the commissary of the police, a number of the door shutters, and the firemen, after meeting the rat catcher and passing the man in the felt hat upper unperceived, the Viscount and I arrived without obstacle in the third cellar, between the set piece of the scene of the Roi de Lahore. I worked the stone, and we jumped into the house which Eric had built himself, in a double case of the foundation walls of the opera. And this was the easiest thing in the world for him to do, because Eric was one of the chief contractors under Philippe Garnier, the architect of the opera, and continued to work by himself when the works were officially suspended during the war, the siege of Paris, and the Commune. I knew my Eric too well to feel at all comfortable on jumping into his house. I knew what he had to be made of, a certain palace at the Mazarinades. From being the most honest building conceivable, he soon turned it into a house of the very devil, where you could not utter a word, but it was overheard or repeated with an echo. With his trapdoor, and the trapdoors throughout, the monster was responsible for endless tragedies of all kinds. He hit upon astonishing inventions. Of these, the most curious, horrible, and dangerous was the so-called torture chamber. Except in special cases, when the little sultana amused herself by inflicting suffering upon some unoffending citizen, no one was led into it but wretches condemned to death. And even then, when these had had enough, they were always at liberty to put an end to themselves with the Punjab lasso or bowstring, left for their use at the foot of the iron tree. My alarm, therefore, was great when I saw that room into which Monsieur le Comte de Chagny and I had dropped was the exact copy of the torture chamber of the rosy hours of Manzanarian. At our feet I found the Punjab lasso, which I had been dreading all evening. I was convinced that the rope had already done duty for Joseph Buquet, who had, like myself, must have caught Eric's one evening working the stone in the third cellar. He probably tried it in his turn, fell into the torture chamber, and only left it hanged. I can well imagine Eric dragging the body in order to get rid of it to the scene from the Roi de Lahore, and hanging it there as an example, or to incense the superstitious terror that was to help him in guarding the approaches of his lair. Then, upon reflection, Eric went back to fetch the Punjab lasso, which is very curiously made out of catgut, and which might well have set an example an examining magistrate thinking. This explains the disappearance of the rope. And now I discovered the lasso at our feet, in the torture chamber. I am no coward, but a cold sweat covered my forehead as I moved the little red disc of my lantern over the walls. Monsieur de Chagny noticed it and asked, "What's the matter, sir?" I made him a violent sign to be silent. An unofficial report from Tonkin received in Paris at the end of July 1909 relates how the famous pirate chief de Tham was tracked together with his men by our soldiers, and how all of them succeeded in escaping thanks to this trick of the reeds. Daragoa is a Persian for chief of police. That is what they called chief of police in Persia, Daragoa. The Persian might easily have admitted that Eric's fate also interested himself, for he was well aware that if the government of Tehran had learned that Eric was still alive, it would have been all up with the modest pension and the erstwhile Deragoa. It is only fair, however, to add that the Persian had a noble and generous heart, and I do not doubt for a moment that the catastrophes which he feared for others greatly occupied his mind. His conduct throughout this business proves it, and above all, praise. Chapter 22. In the Torture Chamber. The Persian's narrative continued. We were in the middle of a little six-cornered room, the sides of which were covered with mirrors from top to bottom. In the corners we could clearly see the joins in the glasses, the segments intended to turn on their gear. Yes, I organized them. I recognized the iron tree in the corner at the bottom of one of these segments, the iron tree with its iron branch for hanged men. I seized my companion's arm, the Vicomte de Chagny, and he was all a-quiver, eager to shout to his betrothed that he was bringing her help. I feared that he would not be able to contain himself. Suddenly we heard a noise on our left. It sounded at first like a door opening and shuttering in the next room. And then there was a dull moan. I clutched Monsieur de Chagny's arm, and more firmly still, and then we distinctly heard these words. You must make your choice. The wedding mass or the requiem mass. I recognized the voice of the monster. There was another moan, followed by a long silence. I was persuaded by now that the monster was unaware of our presence in this house, for otherwise he would have certainly managed not to let us hear him. He would only have had to close the little invisible window through which the torture lovers looked down into the torture chamber. Besides, I was certain that if he had known of our presence, the tortures would have begun at once. The important thing was not to let him know, and I dreaded nothing so much as the impulsiveness of the Vicomte de Chagny, who wanted to rush through the walls to Christine Daae, whose moans he continued to hear at intervals. The Requiem Mass is not all gay, Eric's voice resumed, whereas the Wedding Mass, you can take my word for it, is magnificent. You must take a resolution and know your own mind. I can't go on living like this, like a mole in a burrow. Don Juan Triumphant is finished, and now I want to live like everyone else. I want to have a wife like everybody else, and I want to take her out on Sundays. I have invented a mask that makes me look like anybody. People will not even turn around in the streets. You will be the happiest of women, and we will sing all by ourselves till we swoon away with delight. You are crying. You are afraid of me, and yet I am not really wicked. Love me, and you shall see. All I wanted was to be loved for myself. If you loved me, I should be as gentle as a lamb, and you could do anything with me that you pleased. Soon the moans that accompanied this sort of love's litany increased and increased. I have never heard anything more despairing, and Monsieur de Chagny and I recognized that this terrible lamentation came from Eric himself. Christine seemed to be standing dumb with horror, without the strength to cry out, while the monster was on his knees before her. 3 times over, Eric fiercely bewailed his fate. You don't love me. You don't love me. You don't love me. And then, more gently, why do you cry? You know it gives me pain to see you cry. A silence. Each silence gave us fresh hope. We said to ourselves, perhaps he has left Christine behind the wall. And we thought only of the possibility of warning Christine Daae of our presence, unknown to the monster. We were unable to leave the torture chamber now, unless Christine opened the door to us, and it was only on this condition that we could hope to help her, for we did not even know where the door might be. Suddenly, the silence in the next room was disturbed by the ringing of an electric bell. There was a bound on the other side of the wall, and Eric's voice thunder. "Somebody ringing? Walk in, please." A sinister chuckle. "Who has come bothering me now? Wait for me here. I am going to tell the siren to open the door." Steps moved away. A door closed. I had no time to think of the fresh horror that was preparing. I forgot that the monster was only going out perhaps to perpetrate a fresh crime. I understood but one thing. Christine was alone behind the wall. The Vicomte de Chagny was already calling her. "Christine! Christine!" As we could hear what was said in the next room, there was no reason why my companion should not be heard in his turn. Nevertheless, the Viscount had repeated his cry time after time. At last, a faint voice reached us. "I am dreaming," it said. "Christine, Christine, it is Raoul." Silence. "But answer me, Christine, in heaven's name. If you are alone, answer me." Then Christine's voice whispered Raoul's name. "Yes, yes, it is I. It is not a dream, Christine. Trust me. We are here. We are here to save you. But be prudent. When you hear the monster, warn us." Then Christine gave way to fear. She trembled lest Eric should discover where Raoul was hidden. She told us in a few hurried words that Eric had gone quite mad with love, and that he had decided to kill everybody and himself with everybody if she did not consent to become his wife. He had given her till 11 o'clock the next evening for reflection. It was the last respite. She must choose, and, as he said, between the wedding mass and the requiem. And Eric had then uttered a phrase which Christine did not quite understand. "Yes or no. If your answer is no, everyone will be dead and buried." Soon I understood the sentence perfectly, for it corresponded in a terrible manner with my own dreadful thought. "Can you tell where Eric is?" I asked. She replied that he must have left the house. "Could you make sure?" "No, I am fastened. I cannot stir a limb." When we heard this, Monsieur de Chagny and I gave a yell of fury. Our safety, the safety of all three of us, depended on the girl's liberty of movement. "But where are you?" asked Christine. "There are only two doors in my room. The Louis Philippe room, of which I told you, Raoul, a door through which Eric comes and goes, and another which he has never opened before me, and which he has forbidden me to ever go through, because he says it is the most dangerous of doors, the door of the torture chamber. Christine, that is where we are. We are in the torture chamber." "Yes, but we cannot see the door." "Oh, if I could only drag myself so far, I could knock at the door and tell you where it is." "Is it a door with a lock?" I asked. "Yes, with a lock." "Mademoiselle," I said, "it is absolutely necessary that you should open that door to us." "But how?" asked the poor girl tearfully. We heard her straining, trying to free herself from the bonds that held her. "I know where the key is," she said, in a voice that seemed exhausted by the effort she had made. "But I am fastened so tight. Oh, the wretch!" And she gave a sob. "Where is the key?" I asked, signing to Monsieur de Chagny not to speak and to leave the business to me, for we had not a moment to lose. In the next room, near the organ, with another little bronze key, which he also forbade me to touch. They are both in a little leather bag, which he calls the bag of life and death. "Raoul, Raoul, fly!" Everything is mysterious and terrible here, and Eric will soon have gone quite mad, and you are in the torture chamber. Go back by the way you came. There must be a reason why the room is called by that name. "Christine," said the young man, "we will go from here together or die together. We must keep cool," I whispered. "Why has he fastened you, mademoiselle? You can't escape from his house, and he knows it." "I tried to commit suicide. The monster went out last night. After carrying me here and fainting and half chloroformed, he was going to his banker, so he said. When he returned, he found me with my face covered with blood. I had tried to kill myself by striking my forehead against the wall." "Christine!" groaned Raoul, and he began to sob. Then he bound me. I am not allowed to die until 11 o'clock in the morning. Mademoiselle, I declared, the monster bound you, and he shall unbind you. You have only to play the necessary part. Remember that he loves you. Alas, we heard. Am I likely to forget it? Remember it and smile to him. Entreat him. Tell him that your bonds hurt you. But Christine Daae said, Hush! I hear something in the wall on the lake. Is it he? Go away, go away, go away. We could not go away, even if we wanted to, I said, as impressively as I could. We cannot leave this place. We are in the torture chamber. Hush, whispered Christine again. Heavy steps sounded slowly behind the wall, then stopped and made the floor creak once more. Next came a tremendous sigh, followed by a cry of horror from Christine, and we heard Eric's voice. I beg your pardon for letting you see a face like this. What a state I am in, am I not? It's the other one's fault. Why did he ring? Do I ask people who pass to tell me the time? He will never ask anybody the time again. It is the siren's fault. Another sigh, deeper, more tremendous still, came from the abysmal depths of a soul. Why did you cry out, Christine? Because I am in pain, Eric. I thought I had frightened you. Eric, unloose my bonds. I am not your prisoner. You will not try to kill yourself again. You have given me till 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, Eric. The footsteps dragging along the floor again. After all, as we are to die together, I am just as eager as you. Yes, I have had enough of this life, you know. Wait, don't move. I will release you. You have only one word to say, no, and it will be over with everybody. You are right, you are right. Why wait till 11 o'clock tomorrow evening? Tomorrow? True, it would have been grander, finer, but that is childish nonsense. We should only think of ourselves in this life, of our own death. The rest doesn't matter. You're looking at me because I am all wet. Oh, my dear, it's raining cats and dogs outside. Apart from that, Christine, I think I am subject to hallucinations. You know, the man who rang at the siren's door just now. Go and look if he's ringing at the bottom of the lake well. He was rather like, there, turn around. Are you glad? You're free now. Oh, my poor Christine, look at your wrists. Tell me, have I hurt them? That alone disturbs death. Talking of death, I must sing this requiem. Hearing these terrible remarks, I received an awful presentiment. I, too, had once rung the monster's door, and without knowing it, must have set some warning current in motion. And I remembered the two arms that had emerged from the inky waters. What poor wretch had strayed to that shore this time? Who was the other one, and the one whose requiem we now heard sung? Eric sang like the god of thunder, sang Dies Irae, that enveloped us in a storm. The elements seemed to rage around us. Suddenly the organ and the voice ceased so suddenly that Monsieur de Chagny sprang back on the other side of the wall with emotion, and the voice changed and transformed, distinctly grated out these metallic syllables. What have you done with my bag?
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.